If you love chilling mysteries, unsolved cases, and a touch of mom-style humor, Moms and Mysteries is the podcast you've been searching for. Hey guys, I'm Mandy.
And I'm Melissa. Join us every Tuesday for Moms and Mysteries, your gateway to gripping, well-researched true crime stories. Each week, we deep dive into a variety of mind-boggling cases as we shed light on everything from heists to whodunits. We're your go-to podcast for mysteries with a motherly touch. Subscribe now to Moms and Mysteries wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Chris Gethard, and I'm very excited to tell you about Beautiful Anonymous, a podcast where I talk to random people on the phone. I tweet out a phone number, thousands of people try to call, I talk to one of them, they stay anonymous, I can't hang up, that's all the rules. I never know what's going to happen. We get serious ones. I've talked with meth dealers on their way to prison. I've talked to people who survived mass shootings. Crazy funny ones. I talked to a guy with a goose laugh, somebody who dresses up as a pirate on the weekends. I never know what's going to happen. It's a great show. Subscribe today, Beautiful Anonymous.
This is Gala Avery reporting to you from inside the Video Archive Cinema Club, the 20-seat secret cinema located within the Vista. Today, I am joined by Video Archive Cinema Club manager Matt Landsman to chat about the calendar for the week of Monday, December 9th. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Gala. Thanks for coming back.
I'm so happy to be here, especially because the calendars have been printed. So anyone who wants a copy of the December calendar, which you may have seen on Instagram and Twitter, they are now available at the Cinema Club. And I think Matt and I are going to go through the calendar a little bit just to talk about the design.
So for the last couple months, Gala and I have been discussing color theory in regards to the calendars and which colors pair together really nicely, because I designed both the Vista Midnights and Matinee calendars and the Video Archive Cinema Club calendars. So obviously October was orange, and then we had pink for November, which was sort of a happy accident.
Yeah, we were trying to get purple, but they didn't have the purple, so it ended up being pink. But you know what? C'est la vie.
And then Gala actually... why don't you share your suggestion for December?
Well, we were thinking about what kind of calendar colors you could do and what calendar colors have never been done before. And I was thinking, well, what if you had a black calendar that celebrated a Black Christmas? And we weren't really sure if it could be done because it's a lot more than just inverting a picture. There's a lot of artistry that has to go into it. But you know what? Matt, you pulled it off. And before us, we have the Black Christmas, December 2024 calendar.
Probably the first ever black calendar in the history of Bev and Vista, as far as I know. And like Gala said, a lot more went into this than simply just making it the way I normally make it and inverting it. It kind of had to be rethought from the ground up in terms of which sections were white from a layout perspective, like the borders and stuff like that, and which sections were black. I thought about maybe making the top area around the Cinema Club logo in white, but that logo doesn't really read over white. So that part stays black, and then the back of the rest of it stays black. And then, of course, it was a different approach in terms of designing the actual character graphics, because all the logos are now in white or gray, and then the characters themselves, weren't inverted. So I often had to add like a little shadow or a border around some of the people on the calendar to make them stand out. So this was a really interesting design challenge, and I'm pretty happy with how it came out.
I am too. I mean, there are some standouts just like from an artistry point, like as I'm holding the calendar in my hands right now. One of them happens to be Deadly Games, Dial Code Santa Claus. Like, I think that just stands out so excellent, kind of like just like in the middle of the calendar. It looks really cool. Also, LA Confidential at the bottom just looks great, and Blast of Silence. And I love this little Merry Christmas in the bottom left corner with Santa Claus. And
that was
reindeer.
Another one of your ideas. So was the quote on the bottom.
Merry Christmas, you filthy animals. So that's what I'm going to be saying to all y'all this Christmas.
And in our filler space, of course, we have our little theme song. Let's all go to the lobby.
Oh, yeah, because there was one night where the Cinema Club did not open because there was a premiere here at the Vista. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. And since we are talking about treats, I actually have a little story to share. On our Patreon chat, sometimes people come and they share stories about their experiences here at the Cinema Club. And a gentleman named Aaron Lee came to the Cinema Club for the very first time for the triple last month of the Bulldog Drummond. And he shared his experience over in our Patreon chat, which I shared with Quentin and Roger, and they were both absolutely tickled with the review of the cinema. So I just had to ask Aaron about his snack choice. So today's snack feature comes from Aaron Lee, and it is a popcorn and something called Chuckles, which I know there are some fans out there, but I've never tried.
So we're going to try them now.
We're going to try a Chuckles.
Chuckles taste test.
But which color should we do?
They're very They have that like Sour Patch Kids texture.
Oh no, I ate so many last night.
Mm,
Oh, it's totally different than what I thought it was going to be.
that's pretty good.
It's totally different. Thanks, Aaron, because that just made us try Chuckles. So if you want Chuckles or any other kind of candy, make sure that you go to the lobby and get yourselves a treat before any of these screenings this week, which we're going to be starting out with Tuesday the 10th at 2 p.m. with Condemned Women and They Made Her a Spy.
Both directed by Lou Landers. And Condemned Women is from 1938, and this is the start of a Sally Eilers power double. If you missed her last week in Bad Girl, which was sort of her star-making turn, which we're actually showing the night that we're doing this recording, and Remember Last Night, which is more of an ensemble piece that she's in, directed by James Whale, these are two movies where she comes across really strongly. I would actually say, out of all the movies that we're showing to showcase her, she comes across the most strongly in these movies.
Sorry, I just interrupted Matt because I do not like these Chuckles.
Condemned Women is a women's prison movie in which Sally Eilers plays this woman, Linda Wilson, the larcenist. And we meet her on a boat as she's headed to a women's prison, convicted for shoplifting, and the women around her are sort of talking about their guys or the time that they're about to do or how they're former actors, and she's just sitting there stewing and just like looking icy and mad, and she makes a mad dash for it. And it's almost like the opening of Bad Girl in a way, where the opening of Bad Girl, she comes out to Here Comes the Bride, and she's in this bridal dress. And at first you think that she's about to get married, and then you realize she's just sort of modeling the dress for these people in the store. And in this case, we realize she's incarcerated as this scene plays out. And she runs through the door, or jumps out the window, rather, on this boat and tries to jump overboard. And who stops her from jumping? Louis Hayward.
Of course. And Quentin, as we all know, is a huge fan of Louis Hayward, and he is a regular in all the movies at the Video Archive Cinema Club. I
mean, literally almost every month. He is one of the most recurring actors that we have to feature in here, and we're very happy to have him.
I also love this whole idea of like a women in prison movie, because we talk about this a lot on the main show Video Archives podcast, but we oftentimes are referring to, the 70s exploitation women in prison movies that have Pam Grier in them and Roberta Collins. And it's just really cool to kind of go back in time and see that this women in prison genre spans way longer than one might think. I mean, this movie is 1938.
Right, which means it's a post-code movie, which means that in some ways what they were trying to do was restricted by the Hays Code. And it's funny because in a lot of these women in prison type movies, it's the kind of thing where you think that they're wrongfully incarcerated and they need to sort of like clear their name or something like that. And in this case, she actually did commit the crimes that she was accused of doing, which was theft. And they're having her in some ways commit more theft in order to make her escape in jail. So this was a bold performance, pretty typical of Sally Eilers. So she ends up in jail and she starts meeting all these rough women who are like planning their escape, like Lee Patrick, who plays Big Annie, who's sort of the, matronly sort of gang leader in the jail. And Anne Shirley, who actually looks quite a bit like Sally Eilers in this movie. There were times where I almost confused them. George Irving from Bringing Up Baby, he plays the warden who says, "It's 100 times harder for a woman to stand in prison today than it used to be." And it's true because all kinds of horrible shit is happening to the women in this movie. There's like this scene where they get typhoid from the water supply, and it's really scary. There's like a montage where they're talking about typhoid over and over again as like an epidemic, and there's disembodied heads coming up on the screen screaming typhoid, typhoid, typhoid with like close-ups of hypodermic needles. So if you're squeamish about medical stuff, that was like a pretty grotesque scene.
You know what? And people are squeamish about medical stuff because it kind of brings me to my next question. Is this like a scary movie? Because I think this would be like more like a dramatic film, right?
Yeah, it's a dramatic movie. Basically, the arc is that she ends up in jail, and Louis Hayward, who's the guy that prevented her from jumping to her death on the boat headed to jail in the beginning, ends up being the prison psychiatrist who falls in love with her and has this plan of marrying her once she gets out of jail.
Naughty, naughty. You're not supposed to be doing that.
It is very naughty, naughty. And the guy who's like running the prison, George Irving, is losing his faith in Louis Hayward because of this. And it all sort of culminates in this incredible, chaotic, and honestly kind of scary prison break, prison riot set piece that I think, to me, feels unlike a lot of stuff I've seen from this era of filmmaking, where there's dozens and dozens of extras and women just like clawing at each other, and there's smoke and there's fire and they're running down the stairs, and Sally Eilers is like off to the side like screaming against these prison bars, and they're all trying to make their escape, and there's just tons of chaos, and it's the centerpiece of the movie. And then the nurses are like using pistols, like shooting at the inmates who are like shooting back, and they make this sort of like daring escape. And the movie doesn't end there. The I won't spoil how it all pans out, but this movie actually sort of turns into a courtroom drama in the third act.
I also just want to give a shout out to Lee Patrick, because she's in one movie that I really love, which is Now Voyager, directed by Irving Rapper. And then, of course, you can see her in The Maltese Falcon.
And she has a really great moment with Sally Eilers in the third act of this movie. She ends up being such a strong character in this movie. Big Annie, Lee Patrick. There's a scene where, Sally is so cold and steely and just like unhappy in her position in life throughout most of this movie, except when Louis Hayward is around, of course. And towards the end, when she's in a getaway car with Big Annie, Sally finally cracks, and it's pretty amazing to watch. And I thought that this movie had this beautiful set that I was convinced had to be a real prison that they were shooting in, and I looked it up because I was like, must be like the actual jail, because there's so much depth to the set. But the interiors were actually RKO Studios, and the exterior was San Quentin Prison.
Wow, the set work that you find in these old 30s and 40s movies is always just spectacular. You really know that these are artisans that are creating these sets, and that they know exactly how to do it to the point where it looks like it's a real prison inside.
So before we move on from this, we have to talk about Lou Landers, who's going to be talked about a lot on this show because he directed several of the movies in this episode. And he started making movies in the 30s. And his first significant one that most people know was The Raven with Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi in 1935. And from there, he made a ton of B movies and what they called programmers for RKO and Columbia. And he ended up directing a lot of TV. And his first one with Sally Eilers was Without Orders, which we'll talk about soon, in 36. And then Danger Patrol in 37. And then Condemned Women in 38. And then I Was a Prisoner on Devil's Island in 41, which we actually have a beautiful original poster of right here from Quentin's collection, which, even though we're not showing that one this month, we are going to display that as part of our Sally Eilers display. So I think this makes Lou Landers Sally Eilers' most worked with director. He might be a Roger favorite too, because he directed a lot of aviation movies.
Oh yeah, then Dad typically likes those, especially when the aviation is really good. But maybe we'll have to ask Roger and see how he feels about Lou Landers. Now, moving on to the second title on the double billing, They Made Her a Spy.
This one is not a Lou Landers movie. This one is actually the first directorial effort by Jack Hifley, who was an editor for RKO, who started as an assistant editor and worked his way up. And he actually edited The Saint Strikes Back, which was the first one starring George Sanders. And after that was such a big hit, he ended up, after this movie, getting to direct the next three Saint movies: The Saint Takes Over, The Saint's Double Trouble, and The Saint in Palm Springs. So this one is an espionage thriller. We have Sally Eilers in top billing, and I like her in this one because she's quite literally imbued with more agency than she has in previous films that we've seen her in. She's not in prison. She's not someone's girlfriend. In this case, she comes off really confident and strong and powerful because she is a 24-year-old woman who is recruited into spydom after her brother is killed in a military rocket shell testing incident. But perhaps this was actually sabotage. So she gets recruited by the Secret Service to go undercover to find out the truth. And she finds this gang where they're sabotaging military equipment. So they send her in as a spy to meet up with one of their operators at this Dome Cafe with waiter number 4. And then she goes inside and she meets this guy who brings her to the sinister Dr. Kroll, who's played by Fritz Lieber, who's great in this movie. And I think he sort of plays like a great sort of intimidating figure in this movie, and she finds him behind this like breakaway bookcase, and then he starts giving her missions and infiltration jobs, and she gets caught up in this web of spies, and you kind of get to see her doing like dual roles. There's a part where she's playing like an innocent saleswoman, and she's like grabbing passports, and then she's handing them over to Dr. Kroll. And Alan Lane is sort of the romantic sort of partner character in this, who plays an investigative reporter trying to get her to the bottom of this.
And you may know Alan Lane from a couple of Audie Murphy movies that have played at the New Bev before, Hell Bent for Leather and Posse from Hell. But he has like kind of like a medium-sized role in Hell Bent for Leather and a very, very, very small role in Posse from Hell. But I really love those two Westerns, and it'll be nice to see him kind of in a leading role. And then Fritz Lieber has also been in Cobra Woman. Did you and I go see Cobra Woman together?
I don't think so.
Fritz Lieber has a very small part in that as well. But man, I don't know how to describe Cobra Woman. You should just go and try to check it out. But seeing it at the Bev was an amazing experience.
There's something else about that. Oh, Cobra Woman is a movie that is known for starring Maria Montez, who has top billing in The Exile, even though she's only in one scene of The Exile, or she's only in a couple scenes of The Exile, and that's the Max Ophuls Douglas Fairbanks Jr. movie that Douglas Fairbanks wrote and produced and starred in. And Maria Montez had this deal, basically, where she had to be top billing in it, even though she kind of isn't in the movie all that much and isn't the main romantic lead in the movie. That's Rita Corday. So it's funny to mention Cobra Woman just as an aside, because as soon as you mentioned that, I was like, oh, Maria Montez. Next up on Wednesday the 11th at 2 p.m. is The Man Who Came to Dinner from 1942, directed by William Kiley.
So The Man Who Came to Dinner is a comedy play, and it's based on the play by George S. Kaufman and Moss Hart, which debuted back in 1939 in New York City. And it had a pretty good run, I think. And then from it spawned two movies. It spawned a 1972 film, which starred Orson Welles, Lee Remick, and Joan Collins, which sounds, to be honest, exactly like a movie that we would cover on the Video Archives podcast. And then, of course, it's spawned the 1942 film, which we will be playing here at the Cinema Club, which stars Bette Davis, Ann Sheridan, Monty Woolley, Jimmy Durant, and Billy Burke.
And I have to interject that the director, William Kiley, was the co-director to Michael Curtiz on The Adventures of Robin Hood, which we showed last month.
The Man Who Came to Dinner is kind of a zany comedy. It's about a critic who wreaks havoc when a hip injury forces him to move indefinitely with a Midwestern family.
And we all love Bette Davis, who's in this movie.
I mean, who doesn't love Bette Davis? This movie is actually really beloved, honestly. A lot of people really love this movie, especially in Bette Davis's career. And the casting is just superb, and the chemistry is really excellent in the movie. Tickets for The Man Who Came to Dinner are still for sale on
VistaTheaterHollywood.com.
So make sure that you grab yours today, because it's going to be a fun show.
Gala, we're all out of chuckles. We have to go to the lobby.
Oh my God, let's go to the lobby and see what kind of snacks we bring back.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
The Fall Line is a deep dive true crime podcast focused on cold cases that could be resolved if the public knew about them. You'll hear about missing people whose families have been searching for decades, John and Jane Doe cases from across the country in desperate need of public attention, unsolved serial homicides like the Atlanta Lovers Lane murders that never made the national news. The Fall Line digs deep, interviewing the families, law enforcement, and experts closest to the crimes to bring you cases you've never heard of and explore what can be done today to solve them. Find The Fall Line wherever you listen to podcasts.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience in their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's LIBSYN, ads.com today.
Let's all go to the ourselves a treat.
And we are back from the lobby, and Matt and I decided to play a game today. So for today's game, we decided to pick a star from this week, which we picked Sally Eilers, and we both went to the counter and tried to decide what Sally Eilers would order if she was coming to a cinema club screening. So Matt, why don't you tell me what you think Sally would have ordered?
I think Sally Eilers was down to earth. She was no BS, and she would have ordered hot tamales and a black coffee.
I also said that she would order hot tamales, but I gave her a glass of rosé.
Oh, wow. Well, it's funny. Like, she just has that hot tamale vibe. We both saw it, and we were like, that's it.
That is so funny because Matt and I were like, I wonder who's going to win. But in reality, we ended up picking out of all the candies, we both picked hot tamales. I think you're right that she would have picked a black coffee, but I feel like she might have spiked it with a little splash of something.
Yeah. Hair of the dog.
A little hair of the dog. Well, that brings us to Thursday the 12th at 7:30 p.m. We have a double feature, Without Orders and Danger Patrol.
And this is a Lou Landers double feature. So once again, we're talking Lou Landers, who was this B-movie specialist, and he would eventually helm 9 aviation films, including Flight from Glory, Sky Giant, Air Hostess, Arctic Flight. And the stars of this movie also appeared in many aviation films, with Sally Eilers being in 3. And not only are people getting to know Sally Eilers in here at the Cinema Club, but they're also getting to know the great Robert Armstrong, who also stars in Remember Last Night. And he did a ton of aviation-themed movies. We showcased a couple of Robert Armstrong movies here already, like King Kong and Most Dangerous Game. But he was in 8 of these aviation RKO movies like The Flying Irishman, Flight at Midnight, and Sky Raiders. So he was just making tons of these movies at the time. And Sally Eilers was also in a lot of these airplane movies. So it's funny that these next 2 are a perfect double because they both feature Sally Eilers and this aviation component. If you are an aviation enthusiast, you might want to check out these 2. I'll mention that they're not available widely on VHS.
I was just going to say, actually, that they're not available widely on streaming either. And I wanted to tie back in. The Man Who Came to Dinner is also not available on streaming. So this week we have a lot of titles that you can only see on physical media. And what a great time to come down to the theater and watch them with a crowd.
I'm going to talk a little bit more about Without Orders because I found this one really compelling. Of the movies that feature Sally Eilers that we have seen heavily where she is one of the leads, I would have to say that this one might be my favorite, Without Orders. In this one, Robert Armstrong plays Wad Madison. He's an ace pilot, and he's dating a stewardess who's played by Sally, who's also sort of learning how to fly. And then you have this hotshot pilot played by Vinton Hayworth, who's named Len Kendrick, who's trying to break a flight record. And what's kind of funny about this is that Eilers' character is named Kay Armstrong, and they're calling her Armstrong a lot in this, even though she's playing alongside Robert Armstrong. So there's this thing where these pilots are trying to break the flight records, and they're all trying to like get her attention because she's like the most beautiful stewardess, and they're all trying to find ways of tripping each other to get in front of her eye, basically. And Vinton Hayworth, who is like this lecherous, arrogant, drunk pilot, he is the bad guy in this movie, but he is also trying to win her affection, and he's sleeping with her sister in this movie, and he doesn't want her to know that. And eventually, when it's going to come out, he slaps her sister in a way that mortally wounds her and lands her in the hospital. Charlie Grapewin, who we've seen before, he's one of those great like old codger actors. He shows up in the Ellery Queen series with Margaret Lindsay.
Oh yeah, and he's also like one of my favorite Uncle Grandpa actors. I mean, he was in The Wizard of Oz and also Grapes of Wrath.
He plays the father of the bad asshole pilot, Len Kendrick, in this movie. And he's sort of dressing down Robert Armstrong, and the dynamic boils down to this, where the sister is going to wake up from her coma and tell Robert Armstrong and Sally Eilers what happened, and that it was Len who slapped her and basically nearly killed her. And there's this flight under pressure where they're like racing to see her. And ultimately, Len, who's the drunk, evil sort of pilot, he has a panic attack and sort of breaks down behind the wheel, and it's Sally Eilers who has to land the plane. And it's Robert Armstrong who's directing her on how to land the plane over the radio. So there's really strong acting from Sally Eilers in this movie, because there's this part where her sister is dying and she bursts into the cockpit and she's demanding that they stay the course even though the engine is leaking. And she's like borderline hysterical. And you really feel for her in this. I would say outside of Bad Girl, from what I've seen, this might be her strongest acting. And like I said, one of the movies where she comes across really, really strongly. I won't spoil all the twists and turns and machinations of how this plays out, but it's pretty dramatic, and there's a lot of really stunning propeller plane takeoffs and aerial sequences and aviation spectacle. And if you like airplane stuff as much as Gala likes trains,
Oh my God,
you're gonna love this movie.
I knew it was coming. I felt the train coming from a mile away.
So yeah, that's Without Orders, and it's a short movie. It's barely over an hour long, and it's really tense and really enjoyable, and you're just going to hate this guy played by Fenton Hayworth in this movie. In a way, he's kind of the most memorable character because he's such a dick.
Now for our second movie on the double billing, which is Danger Patrol, which, Matt, I've heard that this movie is kind of like Wages of Fear / Sorcerer, but melodramatic.
That's true. It's a similar concept to those movies. It's another RKO B movie directed by Lou Landers. And like you said, it has sort of a similar concept to Sorcerer and Wages of Fear. And it begins to this kind of funny dedication to nitroglycerin truck drivers, which feels pretty dated, but it also sort of reveals this thing that was a real profession that people used to have that no longer is something that we hear about. And they call the nitro that they're driving around cans of soup. The things that they're, the containers of the nitro, they call them cans of soup, and they call themselves like soup drivers. So basically, there was this idea that they used to blow open oil wells to release the oil with liquid nitroglycerin. And this was a really dangerous job. And Harry Carey, who we just saw playing Dex in the 1942 version of The Spoilers, that's John Wayne's partner in that movie, he is a veteran soup driver who drives these dangerous nitroglycerin sort of canisters around to these oil rigs, and he's gotten rich from doing this. So in a way, he is kind of a spoiler in this movie too, because he's spoiling his daughter Rotten, which is Sally Eilers, by buying her all these watches and jewelry and stuff, because they make a ton of money doing this constantly life-threatening job, which is the equivalent of over $700 a day, adjusted for inflation, because of how dangerous this was at the time. So then you have John Beale, who wants to go to medical school, but he can't really afford it, who's this new driver just kind of looking to make some money. And of course, he starts driving for Harry Carey. And of course, he falls for Sally Eilers, because who wouldn't? And they sort of start imagining this life together, but she is so upset that this guy that she likes is doing this, and that her father is doing this. She's constantly like wanting her dad to retire from this business. Like, stop buying me all these trinkets, and maybe like stop putting yourself in danger. There's actually another scene in this movie where another truck driver explodes really abruptly. And it kind of goes to show you how dangerous this job actually was. And this movie takes a pretty tragic direction. It's interesting because Sally Eilers isn't a big presence until maybe 15, 20 minutes in, which is like
1/3 of the movie.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant chunk of the runtime. And then she ends up being the emotional core of this movie. And she's pretty charming. There's like a scene where she's like a beekeeper, and John Beale has like a bucket on his head, and they just have really fun chemistry together. But she's worried about marrying a soup handler.
And also, we have Lee Patrick in this movie, where if you came on December 10th and watched Condemned Women, you will have just seen her in that role. So again, it's a nice little through line. That is Without Orders and Danger Patrol, playing on December 12th at 7:30 p.m. And as Matt mentioned, both of these movies are really short. I think they're both around an hour, give or take a few minutes. So you're going to be in and out of here. It's a quick double. So again, we are playing 4 of the 6 Sally Eilers movies this week at the Cinema Club. You can catch 2 of them on December 10th at the 2 p.m. matinee, and you can catch the other two on December 12th at 7:30 p.m. Okay, moving on to our evening show on Friday the 13th at 7:30 p.m. You can catch a double feature of The Shop Around the Corner and Remember the Night.
And this is an Ernst Lubitsch movie, which has the Lubitsch touch, as they say. And we love Ernst Lubitsch here at the Cinema Club. We showed a print of That Uncertain Feeling with Burgess Meredith, I think back in May. And of course, this has Jimmy Stewart, who we showcased recently in Navy Blue and Gold, as well as Margaret Sullivan. But this is not just a touching little cute Christmas comedy. This is a love story for the ages. And basically what this is about is two people who work at a store who hate each other and don't get along on any level, but they're both separately enamored with anonymous people who are writing them letters, like love letters, and they are actually the ones writing each other the letters and don't know it.
That kind of sounds like a rom-com that I may have seen before.
Perhaps it was You Got Mail from 1998.
Oh yeah, actually it was.
Which this was a major influence on. And this was Lubitsch's favorite movie he ever made, according to his autobiography. He bought the rights to the play it was based on, and it wasn't meant to be flashy or have these big sets or have Margaret Sullivan in big fancy dresses. It's sort of a quiet, personal story about these two people and their connection. And Lubitsch drew upon his own experience working in his father's shop in Berlin when he was a kid. And this is set in Budapest, and he basically made this as a send up to his own sort of childhood and this fear of the bosses that all these sort of workers in these stores had at the time. And it's just a really great human story that's set around Christmas time. And it's a major, major classic that people still love to this day. And we're showing it on a VHS tape, which Gala is holding.
Yeah, I'm holding it. I actually remember I saw this movie back in 2017 for the first time. And it is such a kind of special, cozy movie to feel. I mean, you got to remember the setting is pre-World War II Europe. So it's right before everything's about to change. And the love story in it, it kind of just evolves naturally, which makes it just for a really good time and a little bit of a tearjerker if you're going to come in here and you just want to feel all the emotions.
That brings us to Remember the Night, the second half of the double bill from 1940, directed by Michael Leeson. And what's interesting about this one is that it is the last movie that Preston Sturges wrote but did not direct. And I think that's because the director kept cutting stuff out of the movie, and that sort of like invigorated Preston Sturges to start writing movies. And he worked with Barbara Stanwyck on this movie, who's the lead in it, and she enjoyed that experience so much working with him, and they became friends that he wrote The Lady Eve for her after their time together on set of this movie. And this is another Christmas movie. Again, it stars Barbara Stanwyck and Fred MacMurray. And basically, this is a movie about a shoplifting woman, another theme to condemned women, who is out on bail. And she ends up sort of falling in love with this Pennsylvania sheriff. And of course, the mother disapproves because he should not be fraternizing with this criminal woman who could damage his career. And of course, she doesn't want to cause trouble to his career either. And there's this sort of funny push and pull of, is she going to stay with him despite him being someone of the law? And I think it pairs really nicely with the Louis Hayward, Sally Eilers dynamic in Condemned Women in a way, where he doesn't want to jeopardize his career as a psychiatrist, and she doesn't want him to jeopardize that either, because there's criminal ladies in these movies.
I also love that this night in particular is all about kind of unexpected love. Mm-hmm. It's like you have two people that shouldn't fall in love that do. And so it's a really nice double feature. Whoever programmed this did an excellent job. Also, 4 years later, you can see Fred MacMurray and Barbara Stanwyck in one of my favorite movies, Double Indemnity, where they come back together in the leading roles. So this is actually kind of really special to be able to see them transform together throughout the years.
And then they were in The Moonlighter together in 1953, and then in There's Always Tomorrow in 1956. So they almost have that sort of Linklater type connection where they're checking in to do these romantic parts together every 5 or so years.
And for our last show of the week on Saturday the 14th at 7:30 p.m., we have Don't Open Till Christmas and Blood Beat.
So if you know me, you know that I love VHS horror and horror movies from the 1980s that were sort of these great VHS covers. And of course, I had to get some of those on the calendar this month if I was able to. So I'm pretty excited about this particular double bill. Don't Open Till Christmas from 1984 is directed by Edmund Purdom, and it's the only film he ever directed. And he was an actor in Pieces, and he only agreed to star in this movie if he could direct it. And then from what I was reading, like 4 other guys ended up finishing directing it, but he still retains the typical directing credit. And this is sort of like the typical like don't get stabbed in London movie where people are, there's someone going around in a clear Alice Sweet Alice-esque grinning mask, like one of those see-through murder masks, killing people dressed like Santa on Christmas, and he's using a straight razor. And there's a lot of really gnarly, dark, bloody, nasty kills in this movie. There's a scene where somebody's like roasting chestnuts on an open fire and they get pushed into the open fire. And there's this amazing sort of fun house type wax museum dungeon sequence that the movie's kind of iconically known for, where the killer is chasing someone through this sort of funhouse dungeon. And there's a scene where the killer chases someone through this like theater type setting where Caroline Munro from Maniac is actually like singing on a stage. So it's a great bloody, nasty exploitation flick, and it certainly has its fans. We don't have to work too hard to sell this one, because even though it isn't a movie that everyone has seen, like Black Christmas or something like that, I think that these sort of VHS horror 80s movies just have a very thirsty audience. So if you want to read the box.
Well, when I pick up the box, it's a nice heavy tape.
It's a Vestron video.
Oh my God, Vestron does it so good. But the back of the box has this line. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring. They were all dead. It just made me laugh. From the makers of Friday the 13th comes the film that shatters all barriers of horror. Don't Open Till Christmas is the thrilling and bizarre murder mystery where nothing is sacred, even Santa Claus. A killer is loose in London, and his sights are set on one target, Santa Claus. Dozens of them. Jolly old Saint Nick is stabbed, beaten, and electrocuted in department stores, at parties, and even on crowded street corners. What sort of twisted mind is behind these barbarous acts of violence? Scotland Yard is on the trail, but every clue points them in a different direction. The culprit is right under their noses, but will they come to this climactic conclusion in time? Don't Open Till Christmas, the gift of terror that just won't wait.
And that leads us to the second half of this double bill, for which I have picked a truly weird B picture, the type which you really don't see often, but it is technically a Christmas movie, and that is Blood Beat from 1983. And this is a movie in which a woman goes to her new boyfriend's family home on Christmas to meet them for the first time. And she discovers a samurai suit of armor, which then starts to be possessed and reanimated by the ghost of a samurai warrior, which then goes on a killing spree. And it turns out that multiple people in her family also have psychic powers, and the family is just running around, and some of them are psychic and some of them aren't. And we ultimately find out that the girl is the reincarnation of a samurai warrior. So was she predetermined to meet her boyfriend in this instance in some sort of Rosemary's Baby type cult ritual? Not really. Maybe it was just a coincidence that she met him and the samurai armor that she was the reincarnation of was at the family home. And this is sort of like a bumbling production from what I've read about it. It was, can you read the director's name, or maybe read the back of the box?
Well, okay, it is Helen Benton, Terry Brown, Claudia Payton in Blood Beat, with James Fitzgibbons, Dana Day, Peter Spelson, director of photography, Vladimir Mall, produced by Helen A. Boley and Henry Zafaratos, written and directed by Fabrice A. Zafaratos, music by Prokofiev and Vivaldi. And this is a Trans World Entertainment box. Do you want me to read the back of it?
Sure.
The very small back.
Because I'm curious how they summarize this.
Well, it's very short and sweet, Matt. I think you're going to like it. A force of evil is unleashed. As a family gathered together at their country home to celebrate Christmas in the American tradition, an evil force descends upon the house. Bloodbeat, a supernatural terror that delivers bizarre and brutal murders. Who can survive its reign of terror? Color, 84 minutes.
So apparently Fabrice A. Zafaratos was very high when he wrote this movie, and the title Bloodbeat refers to the increased heart rate that you feel when you're on drugs.
Oh my God.
And he did everything on this movie. God bless him. He even played the samurai when there were shots of this sort of like ghostly, ethereal samurai. And he admitted openly in the commentary track for this when you buy the Blu-ray that he wasn't a very good director. He had only seen Friday the 13th as far as horror movies, and he planned to improvise most of it. And he expected the actors to do the same, even though it was made with all non-actors. So this movie was filmed full screen on 35 millimeter, which was rare at the time, because the DP thought that it was going to be a TV movie, but the director intended it for theatrical.
And now it's on VHS.
And I think this movie is just a lot of fun. I think that it speaks to this notion that a movie doesn't necessarily have to make plot sense to be effective in horror. This is sort of like a nightmare vision, like a family running around in this like winter Wisconsin home on Christmas being chased by a ghostly samurai warrior, and this girl starts levitating and all these like horrible, violent things start happening. And it actually has some cool Christmas scenery. I think it plays really well as like the second half of a double bill. And it's just so unique to see a Christmas samurai movie set in America that's also a slasher movie. I had to get this one on the calendar if I was able to. And I think it really does have a strong fan base out there. And it's just an interesting, bizarre, underseen kind of film. So I hope that people really enjoy this one, because I really enjoyed this when I first discovered it, I think about 5 years ago.
And again, this show is sold out. But remember, as always, there will be a standby line. That's this week at the Video Archive Cinema Club. Remember, patrons get this episode one day early for free over at patreon.com/videoarchives. If you'd like to get your tickets to any of these shows that we just talked about, you can do so at
VistaTheaterHollywood.com.
And as always, follow them on Instagram at
Video Archives Club
or on Twitter at
Archives Club
for updates on showtimes and formats. Bye, guys. See you next week.
See you later.
This calendar episode was produced by the Video Archives podcast and hosted by Gala Avery and Matt Landsman. Additional audio editing by Eric Clapp. Find even more of Video Archives on our Patreon, patreon.com/videoarchives. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved.